Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Big Tent podcast by Circus Bazaar magazine. Appearing within our amazing little circus today is Professor Geoffrey Roberts, the internationally recognized world authority on Joseph Stalin, the Second World War, and the history of Soviet military and foreign policy. He has published 27 books and some 60 journal articles and book chapters. His work has been published into more than 16 languages. Recently, I came across his latest book, Stalin's Library, A Dictator and His Books, and thought it an extremely interesting read. As it turns out, one of the many authors that Circus Bazaar has was friends with him and brought him along for a podcast of which we're extremely appreciative. Now, Geoffrey is not your average authority on Uncle Joe. He is an old-school British Marxist who, although always critical of the Soviet Union's violent repression of its people, has always dreamt of a more egalitarian world. Also, his views on a man who is almost universally condemned by Western historians and academics may not align with conventional narratives, but you didn't visit Circus Bazaar to get more of the same old, did you? So be prepared to be shocked and scared as we put our magazine in the metaphorical mouth of the lion. I introduce Professor Geoffrey Roberts. Okay. So, Geoffrey Roberts, thank you very much for coming on the Circus Bazaar magazine podcast.
Well, thanks for the invite.
Yes, it's a real honour to interview someone with such a prestigious level of scholarship over the years. And I've read your book. I read it a year and a half ago, or a year ago, and I thought it a wonderful book after reading a review on it in the New Statesman. Basically, my initial inquiry is just to ask you about yourself. Where did you come from? What's your history? How did you get into scholarship of the Soviet Union, and what do you do?
Well, I come from, at the moment, I come from Ireland, yeah. I live in Ireland. I worked at University College Cork for 25 years, and, I went there for a job. I'm an economic migrant, as they say these days. And I stayed, yeah, which was fine. It was the best decision I ever made in my life, was going to work in Ireland, and actually also remaining at University College Cork until the end of my career. So now I'm an emeritus professor at UCC. So I went to Ireland from London. So I'm originally from London. So I'm British. Is my background. The reason I got interested in Stalin, Soviet history, all that kind of thing, was a political interest initially. And the political interest arose from the fact that I was, for nearly 20 years in the British context in London, a political activist. I was on the left, a socialist, a member of the British Communist Party, and as a member of the party, I was associated with people who were trying to understand existing models and forms of socialism, particularly the Soviet system, from the point of view of developing a critique of those systems, with a view to actually making the socialism that we were trying to create in our own country a better system. So I was this is the 1970s I'm talking about, and I was what's called a Euro-communist, yeah. And think about Euro-communism. One of its central features was a critique of actually existing socialism, as what we called it, yeah. So we were supportive of the Soviet Union and other socialist countries as essentially a socialist, essentially has been forms of socialism, but we were critical of their authoritarian character and their repression. I was in the 1970s. I was very active in support for Soviet distance and actually distance from Czechoslovakia as well. So it's a political interest, trying to understand the Soviet system from a political perspective, from making it better. Yeah. Okay. So as a student, I studied international relations. That was my degree. So it made sense for me to actually focus on the international dimensions of Soviet history, i.e., the history of Soviet foreign policy. So that's why I became a specialist in the history of Soviet foreign policy. That was my initial specialism, but since then I've considerably broadened my research interests and my research, and so I get to the point now where I've just this book we're talking about today, Stalin's Library, Dictator in the Box. It's a very sort of wide-ranging study of Stalin and indeed of the Soviet system.
Okay, well, let's jump right into it. You suggest in the book that for Stalin, knowledge is power, and that the intellectual education of the masses would naturally lead to scientific rationalism. How did this play into the thinking of Stalin politically?
I don't think Stalin would thought that knowledge was power in and of itself. Yeah, knowledge could be power, provided the knowledge was the correct knowledge, and provided it was allied to political action, and it was allied to leadership. Yeah, and to obviously the political party that he was a member of, the Bolshevik party. But certainly, yeah, Stalin believed in the power of ideas, believed in the transformative power of ideas, and he believed that. Okay, he believed it because he was an intellectual himself, and that's obviously the thing that defines all intellectuals is their belief in the importance of ideas. But also, he believed it as a matter of personal experience, because ideas, reading books in particular, had changed his view of the world, has changed his life, and led him in a particular direction, indeed to becoming a professional revolutionary. So from Stalin's point of view, if reading and ideas could change his life, then the same could be true of other people.
You refer to Stalin as the 20th century's most self-conscious intellectual dictator.
Yeah.
How does this relate in your mind to academia? I mean, so essentially, do you believe that authoritarianism can arise from intellectual ideas in academia?
Well, Stalin wasn't an academic intellectual. He was a political intellectual. And yeah, I mean, I think authoritarianism can arise in all different kinds of contexts. Yeah, it can arise in an ideological context, which was the case with Stalin, but it could also arise in kind of like in historical political circumstances. Yeah, because the fact that Stalin, as a politician, turned out to be a highly repressive dictator. Yes, presided over mass repressions. Millions of people died unnecessarily as a result of his actions. I mean, some people want to argue that was a function of his ideology, of his Marxism, his particular version of Marxism and socialism. But that's only true to a certain extent. I mean, Stalin's brutality and the repressiveness of the socialist system was a matter of historical development. Can't just reduce it to Bolshevik ideology or to Marxism or communism. So obviously, the crucial, in terms of Stalin's authoritarianism and Stalin's propensity to embrace violence as a political solution, very much framed by his background as being a revolutionary in a repressive system, in repressive Tsarist Russia. The Bolsheviks themselves come into power by violent means in the context of the First World War, and then of course after the revolution you have this civil war in Russia, and the civil war is when I think Stalin, like a lot of Bolsheviks, makes the transition into being an authoritarian who's prepared to do whatever it takes, whatever violence it takes to actually achieve their goals. Now the goals are utopian goals, goals of socialism, goals of human development, but the means they choose, the means they're prepared to use are very crude in some respect. But having said that, it's not just about violence. I mean, Stalin didn't rule by violence alone. He ruled through politics, through ideology, through propaganda, through ideas. Actually, so it's the combination of the two that made Stalin such a powerful figure.
Hermetki is the Russian word for notations on the inside of a book.
Yeah. It's there's no kind of English equivalent of it, but Hermetki means markings, and the markings can be either like just lines down the side or underlinings, or it can also be words. Yeah, and it's hard to find because in English sometimes people talk about marginalia, right? But that doesn't quite work because not all of the Pametki in this case is in the margin. You know, there can be in all kinds of different places in the book that you're talking about. Then other people talk about annotation. But annotation implies like words, isn't it? Yeah. So this Pametki is really a great word to combine different kinds of marks. Yes, words, but other kinds of markings as well. Yeah.
But based on Stalin's Pametki, you've written this book, but you suggest that the greatest influence on Stalin was Lenin.
Yes.
Now, how does that play into the perception that Lenin's last testament, or part of it, was to be critical of Stalin?
Yeah. Sure. Lenin was Stalin's model, his role model as a political leader, and his role model as an intellectual. I mean, okay, so I've written this book about Stalin's vast personal library, and his, as you said, and his Pametki, and and the marketing he made in lots of his books. Well, the same was true of Lenin. Lenin had a vast personal library, and Lenin, marked his books. As many people do. I mark my books. I don't know about you. So there's no doubt whatsoever, but that Stalin modelled himself on Lenin, and I'm sure towards the end of Lenin's life, he becomes quite critical of Stalin, who's become the general secretary of the Communist Party, and he's worried that Stalin might abuse his power both politically and personally. Now, it's not only Stalin that Lenin's critical; he's critical of other Bolshevik leaders, of the top leaders up to this. So, Stalin isn't particularly singled out. Well, he is singled out, but he's not the only one who's actually singled out. Yeah. So there was this critique that Lenin makes, and Stalin felt that the critique was unfair. He found it very very hurtful. He didn't like it, but I don't think it had any fundamental impact on Stalin. I think Stalin quite readily forgave Lenin for this criticism. Of course, criticism which Lenin is making from his sick bed. I don't think it was any particular problem. Some people argued that Stalin was deeply hurt by this criticism, and then it kind of it made him very brittle and sensitive to any kind of criticism. I don't think that's true. I think Stalin admired Lenin. Lenin was his role model, but Stalin was his own man. Yeah.
I think you say in the book that Stalin always considered himself merely a student of Lenin.
Well, this is what Stalin said. Yeah. This is how he presented himself. Yeah. I'm a student of Lenin. But no, I think his self-conception. No, I think he saw himself as Lenin's equal, more or less. Yeah. And so no. Yeah. Originally he was a student of Lenin's, but then Stalin, particularly after Lenin's death, he's Lenin's successor. As the cult slogan had it, Stalin is the Lenin of today, and I think that's what Stalin might modestly say. Oh no, I'm just a pupil. I'm just a student of Lenin's. But actually, what his self-concept, he was the Lenin. Was the Lenin of his day, and he was prepared on that basis to actually revise some of Lenin's ideas. Yeah.
But you suggest, or not suggest, but in Lenin's writing, you believe that he argued for a level of dualism between him and Trotsky. So that both of them had positive characteristics and both of them had negative characteristics, and the risk was that these two would split the party.
Yeah. I think the other thing you have to remember about this episode is Lenin is very ill. And he's trying to exert influence on what's going on in the party. He's trying to assert his kind of authority, give some kind of direction, which is why he comes up with various comments in relation, to Stalin and to Trotsky and to other Bolshevik leaders. So I think that's what's going on. Going on there.
one of my core interests is I consider international socialism a post-Enlightenment ideology of sorts. And you referenced that with Stalin, he believed that there was a natural progression towards communism based on the intellectual education of the masses. Does this suggest that there's a Christian telos embedded at the heart of the ideology itself?
Yeah. It's not just an ideological progression of the masses. It's a political progression. Yeah, it's a combination of political practice and ideological progression. It's the two things together. As far as Stalin is concerned, develops revolutionary consciousness. Yeah, so that's his perspective. Yeah, but of course there was this Marxist eschatology. Yeah, of human history being a progression through a series of stages, culminating, of course, in the communist utopia. But there was always a kind of a tension, contradiction, ambiguity, because was that progression inevitable, right? Or was it an inevitability that had to be created by political action? And of course, the thing about Lenin and the Bolsheviks was, they weren't like passively waiting for the revolution and for human history to turn in the direction of socialism and communism. They were active trying to create that future.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So it's an inevitable future, but it has to be, but it has to be achieved by human action. So is it inevitable, or is it a function of human action? So I think in the end, I don't think Stalin believed it was inevitable in the deterministic sense, but he was confident that human action would create the future utopia, because the future utopia was so desirable, because it was in everyone's interest, and that's where the dynamics of the class struggle lead. And of course, the Bolsheviks succeeded. They carried out this revolution in Russia, seized power, and not only that, they'd maintained power, and then they'd created this, for the first time ever in the world, this socialist system. Which had lots of problems and issues, lots of violence and repression, but it actually worked, and in many respects was a very successful social system. And of course, after the Second World War, became even more successful, and there was an expansion of the Soviet system to other countries in Europe, and indeed in other parts of the world. So Stalin's hope, faith in the future, wasn't completely misconceived and irrational. I mean, I myself, shared in that faith. I mean, I didn't think it was inevitable, but I certainly thought it was possible, and but the possibility was going to be realised, by politics, through politics. And obviously that's the fundamental creed of all kinds of political actors, isn't it? It's nothing particular about communists or socialists in that regard, is there?
Random thought. When I was growing up, I was tinkering a lot with cars. Like, you buy a car, you know how to service it yourself. You could change a carburetor or change the oil or nothing. But now fixing or servicing a car is in the hands of experts.
Right.
I know you're an archival historian, so you've spent a lot of your life in the past. So, but critiquing the contemporary state of politics, at least in the Western world, how do you compare the rule of intellectual elites with at least what I would see as a drive towards a more technocratic form of governance today? Do you think it's a positive or negative? Are there risks associated with it?
I spend most of my life not necessarily the archives, but in my head, or in what I'm reading, or what I'm doing. I'm not sure I have any answer to your question, actually. I don't know. Yeah. If you want to rephrase it, I might be able to give you some kind of. So what you are saying, you think it's politics is very technocratically driven. Is that your argument?
Well,
it has less intellectual content. Is that what you're saying?
No, more so. in the sense that there's a greater deference to the rule of experts in modern politics than what I remember growing up. And it's not just in politics, it's in, as our societies become more technologically dependent on everything, no one knows how to fix a car.
I think different groups of experts have become more adept at winning their position, yes, exerting their influence, yes, and also, and particularly at kind of like closing down of opposition, yeah, on challenges, external challenges to their expertise. So much more adept at protecting their power, protecting their status, protecting their influence, yeah.
I wrote an article many years ago, and at the end of the article, I remember using the closing words that as the same technological tools become available to power, they become available to us as citizens as well. So we can survey power as well. But as it turns out, digital technologies have become largely monopolized in the hands of very, very powerful elites. And I don't think that digital technology or modern technologies have, it seems to have enhanced the power of many states.
I think that's true, but it's also, in some respects, anyway, enhanced the power of citizens to challenge challenge the powers to be, to seek out new ideas, to develop new kind of networks, And there's a very good example of that, which never ceases to amaze me, is that the Ukraine war has been going on for the last couple of years or so, and there's been in the Western, in our society, there's been this very, very dominant, narrative about what the war is all about, a very pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russia, anti-Putin kind of narrative. Yet, it's everywhere. All the politicians seem to have the same song sheet. It's in all the mainstream mass media, on the internet. You have huge flood of kind of information and misinformation. Yes, and manipulation to actually persuade public opinion of the veracity of this narrative of the heroic Ukrainians standing up to standing up to the Russian bear, that kind of thing. David versus Goliath, and even until recently, persuading people that David was winning and Goliath was losing. I think that narrative has collapsed now. But all the way through the war, there's been substantial numbers of people in different countries who have actually been resistant to that narrative, and haven't, despite all the huge kind of like influences being exerted on them, pressure, peer pressure, huge political, and yet there's still people actually challenging, or not, resisting in some ways. That's the thing, and whenever I appeared in media and made some challenges myself, I was amazed at the positive response I got from this. I discovered lots of people out there who agreed with what I was saying, or at least were prepared to just go along uncritically with what the media was telling them was going on in the Ukraine war. So I'm not so convinced by your argument about there are these powerful elites who are using their power, particularly the technological power, to achieve their goals. But the same kind of means are being used by the resistance from below. So in that sense, I'd be more optimistic than you about the current situation.
Yeah.
The thing that does worry me is actually the degradation of politics, public life, political, discourse, the way everything is driven by domestic political kind of calculations. Yes. The absence of principle, in political decision making and in political leadership. And again, we go back to the current situation in the Ukraine war. The West desperately needs to extract itself and Ukraine from this conflict, which the Russians are winning. Ukraine and the West, they're losing, and the more longer it goes on, the worse it's going to be for the Ukraine. So there's a real desperate need, and yet they can't do it, because to do that would result in a huge loss of political face and then not willing to actually make that, which it's true it would, but they're not willing to make that sacrifice. Yeah, that's a degenerate form of politics as far as I'm concerned.
A random thought again. Do you think that if Western countries are forced to remove themselves from this conflict and lose face, that going after those that were perceived to have spread negative information about the conflict are going to suffer the most?
You mean what the elites are going to lash out of their critics?
Yes.
In the post-war.
Yes.
That's a possibility. I think. Obviously there's been lots of. I personally haven't suffered for the stand I've taken. Yeah, but obviously some people have, and there's been lots of pressure, and there's lots of bad stuff been going on, and it depends on. It depends on the way. I think if the war comes to an end in the near future, then I think the danger is not so great. The danger to me is if the war goes on forever in some form, and the conflict goes on forever in some form. But in that context, then I think, you could get a lot of various forms of domestic repression developing in Western societies. On the basis of, this is a life and death struggle. We don't have the luxury for dissidents and the people who are arguing for peace or want to end the war. They're traitors. They're appeasers. They're Putin's puppets or whatever. That rhetoric is out there already. But if it entrenches into a long, long war, in which maybe the West itself might start taking casualties as well as the Ukraine. I think in that context that there may be some serious, serious dangers because of course the thing, it's the extent of liberal intolerance out there is just quite astounding. I find. I call it like liberal totalitarianism, but maybe that's going too far. But there's no doubt about liberal. I consider myself to be a liberal actually, but.
I think what a lot of people consider themselves to be liberals up for question at the moment. I think that the excesses of liberalism is the new liberalism, in a sense.
Well, it depends what we mean by excesses, the excesses that worry me are it's intolerance, it's closing down of debate, it's emotiveness, lack of rationality, things like that. That's the kind of excesses that concern me. But obviously,
I share the same concerns. But while we're on the topic of Ukraine, I'll skip to those questions now. So, I read an op-ed.
So we're not talking about Stalin's library. We're talking about
no. We'll jump back to that. But since we're on this topic, I read an op-ed that you published that argued that the quickest way to end this war would be for Russia to accept Ukrainian membership in NATO in exchange for Ukraine allowing the succession of certain territories to Russia.
That was just. I was trying to figure a way to help the West and Ukrainians to extricate themselves from the conflict, and one way be a political face-saving device of the Russians accepting that Ukraine or part of Ukraine will become a member of NATO, not necessarily immediately, but in the medium term, say, under certain conditions, and then you'd have that would be situated in a kind of broader kind of peace settlement and a broader discussion about European security issues. Okay, so I'm my suggestion is that actually that could work. And I think Mark, it could work for Russia as well. I think that if there's going to be a negotiated settlement, there's going to have to be some kind of international guarantee of Ukraine's future security. Yes, and I think that Ukraine in NATO would be the best guarantee from the Ukrainians' point of view, but also from the Russians' point of view, because it creates a stable and predictable form of guarantee. I mean, the alternative to that is that people who respond to my argument will say, oh no, that's not possible. The only way to end the war on agreed basis is for Ukraine to become neutral, which is what the Russians have been demanding all along. What they were demanding before the war, let alone during the war. But I think the possibility of a neutral Ukraine is dead. It's no longer there. At the end of this war, Ukraine is either going to be part of the West, under the influence of the West, or it's going to be part of and under the influence of Russia. It can be in line with the West or with Russia. Okay, I think that the idea there can be any kind of neutral Ukraine, I think that's a complete illusion. Now, if it's going to be aligned with Russia, the only way that's going to happen in a complete sense is for Russia to impose its control over the whole of Ukraine, perhaps by direct occupation, the whole country. Now, I think that's a possibility, but it would be hugely costly to the Russians to actually do that, and it wouldn't. You might win the war in that sense, occupy the country, force Ukraine into your camp, but the conflict goes on, doesn't it? With all the costs associated with the conflict. So I don't believe the Russians, or Putin anyway, wants to do that. I think they're prepared to negotiate some kind of compromise peace, some kind of limited outcome, that falls way short of Russia occupying the whole of Ukraine. But what is that? What would that outcome look like? So one of my suggestions was, it's just a suggestion, obviously it's an idea, is that what's the big deal about a part of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO under certain conditions? So I mean, I suppose the other thing I was responding to, people are always talking about how this war can be ended, and everyone comes to the conclusion is that it's an intractable dispute because Ukraine will never accept loss of territory, and Russia won't give up the territory, and the West will never accept Russia's security arms, and vice versa. Yeah, so it's people talk themselves into a corner that there's no kind of solution. What I was trying to do was just let's think outside the box. Let's try and be a bit creative here, and maybe there are solutions. I'm not saying my suggestion of the Russians allowing part of Ukraine to enter NATO it will be the solution, or could be the solution. All I'm suggesting, that's the kind of thing, the way we need to think. If we want the war to end, and throughout this whole conflict, I want the war to end as soon as possible. That's my primary goal, because it's hugely costly for both Ukraine and Russia, and it's hugely dangerous for everyone else in terms of the danger of escalation. And it's a very, in a kind of global sense, it's kind of like it's got all kinds of threatening potentialities as well. So so I'm fundamentally I'm pro peace. I'm pro peace
for various reasons. I mean, my personal opinion is that I think this war becomes perpetual, long term, primarily because I think that the West has quite unnecessarily driven Russia into the Russia, Chinese, Iran anti-Western camp, which is a real shame as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know how you turn back the clock on that.
Yeah.
But do you believe Putin is an admirer of Stalin?
Yeah. Okay. But let's just, before I answer that particular question, go back to where we're starting from. You asked me about my personal political history. Yes, and I gave you an answer there. Well, one of the things that one of our catchwords in the 1970s and 1980s, or at least those of us who were admirers of the Italian Marxist and communist Antonio Gramsci, so we had a kind of catchphrase which wasn't Gramsci's originally, but anyway, it's one that's usually attributed to him. And the catchphrase was pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Yeah. Okay, so I kind of share your pessimism about the intractability of the war and all the associated conflicts.
I think actually I'm saying I'm being pessimistic in the short to medium term, but long term, I think
we need to we need to exercise at will as far as we can.
Yeah.
To create the situation that we want to achieve. I mean, Gramsci's successor as the leader of the Italian Communist Party, he used to like to say, so when someone used to say, well, what do you think is going to happen? He used to, one of his comments was, look, I'm not interested in predicting the future or trying to guess what's going to happen in the future. What I'm interested in is the future that we are going to create. I'm interested in what will be, not trying to guess what it might be, what it would be, but that we can achieve through our action. Yeah.
So then how do we turn back the clock and bring Russia, as controversial as this might sound, back into sort of the Western family of nations like it could have post-Cold War?
Well, I think we've gone beyond that.
Yeah.
I don't think that's possible. I think,
but it appears so at the moment.
Well, but what is still possible at the moment, and it may not be possible forever or very much longer, it is possible to establish a partnership with Russia. Yeah? It's not a question of bringing the Russians back into our Western family. I mean, Russians have given up on that project, and they're never going to accept that. But a partnership with Russia, a partnership of equals, peaceful coexistence, collaboration, cooperation, common security. All of that's absolutely possible. It's possible on the Russian side. I mean, okay, there are plenty of Russian nationalists who want to fight to the death, just like there are people on the Western side who want a similar kind of, who don't want the conflict to end anytime soon. But I think Putin, the majority of the Russian people, want the war to end, and they want to reestablish a relationship with the West. But it has to be, it has to be a partnership. Yes. So I feel so. I think on the Russian side, this kind of optimistic vision is entirely possible to realize. The problem is on the Western side, on the Ukrainian side, but I think more on the Western side, right outside of Ukraine. That's where the block to ending the war and retrieving something from it and reconstructing relations with Russia. That's where the block is, because at the moment all the finds are Western politicians and influential elites, think tanks, intellectuals, whatever, are intent on fighting this war forever if they can. And the only thing that's going to stop them from fighting their war forever is if they run out of Ukrainians. If they really do literally fight to the last Ukrainians, or Ukraine gets to a position whereby it can't continue. It can't continue to fight. But apart from that, the sense I get is that the West, is prepared to continue the war, and they're prepared to do what's necessary to remilitarize their own societies, to whip up more and more war hysteria and Russophobia, do whatever it takes.
Well, I know. I mean, John Mearsheimer, which is probably the biggest voice on this particular topic at the moment. I mean, it is his long-term perspective that Russia and the Western countries will align stronger together in opposition to the rise of China long-term. But it may be the perception of Western governments and Western elites that the way you do that is through ultimate destruction of the Russian state. Think Japan, think Germany.
Yeah, I mean, there are all those kind of ideas floating around out there. I don't agree with Mearsheimer in relation to his position in relation to China. I mean, there's no reason why there can't be harmonious relations between China and the West, between China and Russia, between Russia and the West, and indeed with the whole world. Okay, don't say there aren't issues, problems, clashes of interest, of course. Yeah. But there's no reason why those can't be contained in a relatively stable framework of international relations. If that doesn't happen, that's going to be because of political choices they make. It's going to be made because Americans, for example, choose to identify and defy China as a rival and a potential kind of enemy, or the same with regard to Russia. So it's all I mean, John Mearsheimer is a realist, so he thinks certain things happen in international politics because of the nature of the international system, because of the power relationships and the dynamics that arise out of the power relationships and the absence of world government, the state of international anarchy. Well, no, I'm not a realist. I'm a historian.
So it's a rather deterministic approach.
Yes. Although when you listen to John talk about the Ukraine war, he rarely talks in deterministic senses. And when I'm hearing him talking, I think I want to shout out to him on screen. But John, that's not a realist talking there. You're talking like a constructivist, aren't you? Because what you say, what he says is, why can't the war in Ukraine come to an end? He's pessimistic about it because he thinks Western elites don't have the imagination, or they're so bound to their position. Yeah, it's nothing to do with realism at all. Okay, but so I'm a historian. Okay, and obviously power, interests plays a huge role in what happens in international politics. But those power dynamics can be changed in radical ways, and they're changed by politics through political choices. Yeah.
So to quote Terminator 2, there's no fate but what we make.
Yes.
So you believe that we as actors have a choice?
Yeah, absolutely. That's fundamental. It always has been, of course, because you might think, well, how can you be a communist in a country like Britain where you got a very small communist party, and you have these utopian aspirations about socialist Britain and the communist Britain? You have to be optimistic. You have to be very willful. You have to believe in freedom of will to choose, and the possibility of remaking the world through political action. You have to be very voluntaristic. That's the terminology you would use. Yeah, so those kind of okay, my politics has changed since the 1970s in some ways, in quite radical ways, but there is that continuity there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But we're talking about what we believe. There's the perception that Stalin's Russia, or the Soviet Union, was the gold standard of a personality cult. But you write in your book that at least it was outwardly Stalin was very negative towards fostering a personality cult around himself.
I think Stalin saw the value of the personality cult. Because the first cult of personality is the cult of Lenin's personality, particularly after he dies. And actually, the way he's still alive as well. And Stalin is very instrumental in the creation of the Lenin cult of personality. Yeah? So Stalin's cult of personality is a kind of continuation of the Lenin cult, an extension of the Lenin cult. So Stalin becomes a revered, saintly kind of figure, just like Lenin had been and still was, of course. Yeah. So he sees the political utility and value of it, but he worries that sometimes it's going too far. Yeah. And the whole system is beginning to revolve around him and the cult and people's attitudes towards him. Yeah. And Stalin's view was that was okay up to an extent, but it's more important that people related to the party, the Communist Party, rather than Stalin. Yeah. So to use the Orwellian kind of reference here, Stalin wanted the population to love the party as their big brother, not Stalin. So that was his view. So he's and there's lots of examples of it in my book. He's constantly trying to rein in the excesses or some of the excesses of the personality cult. So when he's editing key party texts, he's actually deleting stuff that goes too far in relation to personality.
You refer to him as the editor-in-chief of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Is that something you come up with yourself?
Well, that terminology? Yeah. No, someone else's. But if you read the footnotes, you'll see what that was someone else's idea. Yeah.
But what an accomplishment to become an archival historian of Stalin in the Soviet Union. What does it take in practical terms to actually get into this archives? You speak Russian, right?
Well, the main thing it takes is persistence.
Yeah.
And actually, this book is a particular example of that, because there's a kind of backstory to the book. Is that okay? So when I signed the contract for this book, which is about 10 years or so ago now, 10 years. Okay, I was already an established kind of like academic historian. Yeah, already published a number of books. But I fancied the idea of publishing one more book about Stalin, but which would be like a wide-ranging book about Stalin, but not a biography. I didn't want to do a biography because that would be the mountain would be too high for me to climb at that stage in my life and my career. So that's why I took on this project. But the specific reason I took it on was because at the time I took it on, its source, like Stalin's library books, like the books that the remaining books. So after Stalin dies, as everyone knows, he gets denounced by Khrushchev at the 20th Party Congress, and then subsequently there are various decisions taken in relation to dismantling what remained of the Stalin core of personality, including there was a project to establish a Stalin museum, which would have included his book collection as part of that museum. But that project is dropped, and decisions are taken to disperse Stalin's personal effects, including his books. Yeah. But what happens? So his personal library is dispersed, except that librarians and archivists save a part of it, and they save the part of it which is identifiably belonged to Stalin. So a number of books, a few thousand books in Stalin's collection had a stamp on them, which identified them as belonging to Stalin's belonging to Stalin's personal library, or a number of other books he'd actually written in marked, Pametki we were talking about earlier. So those books were retained by the archive. So when Stalin dies, my guess is that he had about 25,000 books. Perhaps it's the size of his library, not just books, but periodicals, pamphlets, other kinds of written texts as well. But of that 25,000, only 5,500 survive. So that was my research. Okay, but that 5,500 books, complete collection, was supposed to be digitized. And which would mean I would be able to access this source online at home on my computer. So it was a very attractive prospect from that point of view. But it turned out this digitization project stalled at a certain point. So only 1/3 of these books were actually digitized. 1/3 of the marked books were digitized, which meant I had to go to Moscow to actually go to the archive to actually look at them directly, which was many trips to Moscow in the archive. And it was a good thing to do because, you can look at digital images of the books on the screen, but you don't quite get, there's all kinds of things which the digital images don't reveal, which you can only find out if you actually have the books themselves. So it was a good thing to do. But of course, it turned what was supposed to be a 2-3 year project into a 10-year project.
I like all.
So it's a question of it's persistence. Yes, and the one thing to say about me, I'm kind of, as a scholar, I'm persistent. I mean, I do get there in the end. But the other thing about this particular book, so there was a problem with accessing the necessary sources. So the logistics of doing the research is quite complex. For reasons to do with the way the archives work as well. But there was another problem, which is I had this source. I wanted to do this book about Stalin as an intellectual, as a reader, paint an intellectual picture or portrait of Stalin. How do I actually do that? How do I actually do that in an interesting and accessible way? And it took me years to actually to find a way of actually writing the book. So that's why. And then I was lucky in the sense that I finally found a way I felt comfortable about writing, how I was going to write the book, just when the COVID pandemic broke out and we all went into us. So I'd made my I'd finished the research and I'd made my conceptual writing breakthrough. Just at the moment when I was backed into a corner at home, and I just had to write the book.
Yeah, damn.
And that is what I did. And once I started, it came out quite quickly. Yeah.
Well, we'll jump to like how you wrote the book in the next question, but I've got a question. I'm very interested in the way we index and categorize knowledge generally.
Yeah.
My first job was in a library, shelving books.
Okay.
According to the Dewey Decimal System.
Yeah.
So this is what I did when I was 15, 16. And even today, if you look at Circus Bazaar magazine and the website, it's all categorized according to a slightly modified version of the Dewey Decimal System.
Right.
And of course, I'm only using certain categories of it. But one day, hopefully, it becomes a very expansive library as we publish more articles from, say, the arts or the sciences rather than the political sciences.
Yeah.
But how we organize knowledge tells us a lot about the ethics of the society we live in.
Right.
I mean, the Dewey Decimal System, for example, is continually modifying itself to be progressive and not putting certain aspects of life under certain categories that people find insulting. Did you have any insight? Because you referenced quite a few times the way Stalin's library was indexed and organized.
Yeah.
What does that tell you fundamentally about his worldview?
Well, of course. So one of the key documents it's actually reproduced in full.
Yeah.
In the book. Okay, there's a facsimile of the Russian edition, original. Then there's a translation. Is Stalin's classification system for his library, and the reason he composed this document was because there was when we mentioned it earlier in the conversation, I think Shushanik and Mnuchin's, Lenin's personal librarian, who after Lenin's death went to work for Stalin as his personal librarian for a while anyway, after Lenin's death in 1924. And basically her job was to actually sort out Stalin's personal library. And what she said to him was, well, how do you want me to do that? How do you want me to classify the books? And he wrote back this memorandum, said, well, this is the way I want you to break down the subject matter of the books. And the way he did it was, is that he broke it down into conventional subject categories. Yes, we're talking about the non-fiction bit mainly here, and that philosophy, history, psychology, the normal kind of subject classification differentiation you have. But then plus he had subcategories which were of particular interest to him because of his politics and his own about revolutionary movements abroad or the history of trade unions or something like that kind of thing. Then also another series of subcategories of Marxists, intellectuals, leaders that he wants to have his books classified under. And top, I think topping list. I can't remember actually, but anyway, top of the list would be Marx, Engels, and Lenin, of course. The founders, the classic founders. So that's the way he did it. So it's very conventional. I'm not sure what you would read into that. What I read into that was that Stalin, and again, it's a kind of it goes with his Marxism. Is interested in lots of different subjects. Stalin, as a Marxist, saw Marxism the key to understanding virtually every aspect of human society and history.
But the connecting tissue of
to Engels and Lenin, and I know that because I was a Marxist myself, and I had the same kind of attitude, and actually I built up the same kind of personal library.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it's different subjects. Yeah,
I mean, if you look at the Dewey Decimal System, for example, you've got knowledge and systems as the top level category, which is the archiving principle before everything else. So Marx, Engels, and Lenin were his archiving principle behind everything. Is this one way to look at it?
Not well. He certainly selected a number of Marxist kind of political thinkers and leaders, and he wants their books kept separate. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it just strikes me as being a very kind of normal classifications when I looked at it, but showing the range of his interests. Yes, that's the one thing I haven't. There's a mystery about this which I haven't been able to work out, is that when Shushanik and Mnuchin, the librarian, when she does actually organise his books. Okay, so that's the first thing. This is his classification system. He tells her, and then she writes back to him saying, "Well, do you want to add some bits to it. It was something to do with law, for example, right? Yeah. And she also asked about what kind of shelving you want for this and stuff like that. So she asked some practical questions. Okay, but then the other thing she does is that she devises a stamp. Yeah. What are they called? The library stamp. Yeah. For his books. Yes. To identify them as belonging to Stalin. And she'd done the same thing for Lenin. Yeah, Lenin had a stamp for his books as well. And then she proceeds to stamp the books that he has in his possession at that time, which is in the mid-1920s. So she's doing for Stalin the same thing that she'd done for Lenin. So the way I put it in the book is that it was her actions, Shoshana Menachev's, this librarian's actions, that actually crystallized Stalin's personal book collection into Stalin's personal library by giving it an identity, by organizing it, by having this library stamp. Yeah. But one of the things she does, and the same applies to what she did for Lenin, and I just can't understand, can't work out why, what the organizing principle was, is that she numbers the books. As in 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. She numbers them. And I'm not. I just. Why did she do that? How would that aid the process of, presumably you're classifying the books because you're going to organize them that way on the shelves, and that it facilitates retrieval. Yes. But why? What would numbering them do to the process? I've never kind of worked out that mystery, unless it was to do with, at some point there might be an idea that, and I think maybe again this comes from Lenin. I think when Lenin dies, he has his personal book collection, and I suspect there was an idea, we need to have a list of these books. So maybe the numbering was to do with a catalogue that was going to be created at some stage, listing all the books in Lenin's collection and also in Stalin's collection. Now, as it happens, Lenin's personal book collection was catalogued. There was a printed book catalogue in it. But it wasn't published until about, was it published 1960? Yeah. And Shoshana Menachev's, she was actually involved in that project as well. Now, Stalin's library, because of the political fallout after his death, because of his denunciation as a brutal dictator by Khrushchev, that doesn't happen to his library, and the books they're in the archives, or they're in another library, they're like whatever. But as we speak, a proper catalogue of Stalin's library books, personal libraries, actually being created in a library in Moscow, which might well lead to the publication of the catalogue in book form at some point in the future. But I just don't know why she numbered the books. Now, what happens is that after Shoshana leaves Stalin's employment, she stops functioning as his librarian. The numbering stops, but the stamping continues until the early 1930s. And at that point, for some reason, I'm not sure why, they stopped stamping the books coming into Stalin's personal collection. Again, another mystery that I'm yet to be able to uncover.
Did you like the question?
What?
The question I just asked. I mean, the epistemological nature of organization of knowledge. I think it's a very fascinating topic.
Yeah, but you come from a kind of like librarian background, don't you? Yeah.
Not really. Well,
yeah.
I run a magazine, but I did start. 15 years old working in a library.
But I have a personal library. My personal library is very chaotically organized. Yeah.
Yeah, mine.
But insofar as it is organized, it's organized according to actually a bit like Stalin's. Kind of conventional subject classification. Because that seems to me to make the most sense of how to separate my books out. And then in terms of when I want to retrieve, and I don't have a catalogue as such, so I have to go and look what I've got on the shelves or in boxes and stuff like that.
Okay, all right.
So maybe I was the wrong person to ask that particular question.
No, I think you're the right person.
But having said that, I've got a lot more interest in things to do with librarianship and libraries. Yeah.
Well, it's the same as me. My personal library is completely disorganized.
Yeah.
But my professional library, like my magazine, is highly categorized. So there's two worlds.
Yeah.
But your personal views. I mean, how have your views towards Soviet Marxism developed over the decades?
Okay, well, originally I was a critic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this already.
Soviet Marxism.
Yeah, we saw it as a socialist country in terms of its socio-economic system, planned system, public ownership, all that state economy, publicly owned economy. Yeah, we saw it as a socialist system. And we also, saw the Soviet Union as be quite a progressive actor in an international context, in terms of its anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, and in terms of its support for peace, and for peaceful coexistence, and stuff like that. But where we were highly critical was about the domestic political regime, its repressiveness. Now, obviously, compared to the Stalin era, the post-Stalin Soviet system is a very mildly repressive, system. People under Stalin, hundreds of thousands of people are killed for their politics, essentially. Yes, maybe millions. Depends how you want to add up the figures. But that's not. You talk about handfuls of people after Stalin's death. People are repressed, they're imprisoned, they're persecuted in various ways. But it's compared to the Stalin era, it's really a mild level of repression. But nevertheless, we were critical. We were Democrats. We were, we believed that socialism needed to become much more democratic, which is, of course, is the way Gorbachev comes along. We're very enthusiastic for Gorbachev and his political reforms, Glasnost and Perestroika and stuff like that. Okay, so I start off as being a critic, and I'm a critic because I'm taking the political perspective, because what I'm interested in is the kind of socialism I want to see and what we can learn from the Soviet experience in that respect.
Yes.
So it's driven by the political goals that I'm engaged with at the time. Okay, but then subsequently, when I drop out of political activity, my interests become much more academic and much more intellectual. Yes, much more driven by producing usable knowledge about Soviet history, politics, and society, as opposed to feeding into a particular political agenda. Okay, so in the context of that, then I become, I become, what's the word? I'm trying to be careful about what I say. Yeah, I become more sympathetic to Soviet project. I begin to see more of the virtues of the system. No, I don't know. I don't change my mind about the repressiveness. I'm not sort of blinding myself to that. Although some people accuse me of doing that, but there's no foundation to it whatsoever to that kind of accusation. So I begin to appreciate its virtues, and whereas in the past I've been more focused on its political vices, particularly the dogmatism of its Marxism, the repressiveness of its politics, and also various aspects about the way the bureaucracy and corruption and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. So there's been that kind of shift. Yes.
I mean, while I was researching for this podcast, I read your book for the second time, and it's a natural thing to inquire. When you write a biography of an individual that's got such a sort of ghastly international historical reputation in the West, that you would come under some sort of criticism for being revisionist over his character. And then I realized where I'd actually been recommended your book in the first place, which was actually a positive/negative review in the New Statesman. He references the author of the review. He refers to your book as a pioneering work of scholarship, but also at times absurdly revisionist, accusing you of trying to rehabilitate Stalin, despite your denial of such intentions. How do you respond to that critique?
Yeah, well, I'm no stranger to controversy in that respect. because I've written other books in which I'd like made a revisionist challenge to conventional kind of thinking. The principal example of what I wrote a book about Stalin's war leadership, a book called Stalin's Wars, which was published in 2006, which is still going strong, by the way, as a book. In which I argue in that contrary to conventional wisdom, Stalin at that time anyway, Stalin was a highly effective war leader, and in fact, without Stalin's leadership, it's quite possible that Hitler might have won the war. Yes, it would have been the triumph of Nazi Germany. So that was, and in that book I said, well, I'm not trying to rehabilitate Stalin. I'm trying to revision Stalin. To see him as a much more complex and contradictory historical character figure than people may think he is, and that kind of like attitude and approach continues in this book. So in that respect, there is nothing new. John Gray's review. I was very glad to see it appear in the New Statesman. He's obviously a prominent political theorist in the British context. Yeah, sure. And he had some interesting things to say about the book. As to it being absurdly revisionist, well, you need to be a bit more specific than that. In what way is it absurdly revisionist? Tell me, and then maybe we can actually have a discussion about it. Excuse me. I mean, one of the normal ways it's attacked is that it's quite an extraordinary line of criticism, in my view, given what's actually in the book, to say that I whitewash Stalin's terror or gloss over his brutalities of a dictator. And I kind of like point out, well, they didn't notice the title of the book. Stalin's Library, a dictator in his books, or if you look into the book, what's the first chapter called? Bloody Tyrant and Bookworm. That's the first chapter of the book. And if you look to the very first sentence of the book, this book explores the intellectual life and biography of one of history's bloodiest dictators, Joseph Stalin. And if you look into the book in a particular chapter, there's a whole section about the Great Terror in the 1930s, and Stalin's personal role in that process. How can I possibly, how can I possibly be accused of whitewashing Stalin in that respect?
Obviously, the Soviet Union took the brunt of defeating Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front. I mean, this is a huge moral calculus to try to equate historically between the achievements of the Soviet Union and the atrocities. So, how do you fundamentally weigh the two?
I'm not sure that I would want to do that. Want to weigh it closer? I'm not sure that I would want to weigh them. Actually, my interest as a historian is presenting them. It's presenting all of the different aspects, and I'm happy to let people weigh the consequences. Do their own balance sheet. You make up your own balance sheet depending on what's important. I'm just happy to say there was good and bad. There was great achievements and great misdeeds. And just we have to face the truth in all its complexity and contradiction. That's my role as a scholarly historian, is to bring that forward. And so it is, and go back to the books. Stalin was an intellectual. He was a reader, a highly engaged kind of like reader. He was a utopian, an idealist. He was truly committed to his cause. He wasn't a bloody maniacal megalomaniac. He had power. He used power, but it had a purpose. So I'm kind of that. A lot of people are not comfortable with that. My characterization of Stalin in those times, but nevertheless, that's the way I see it, and that's the way in my various books, not just in this one. I try to present the evidence that supports. It's not just an opinion or a speculation. Everything I do as historian is as evidence based as possible. Okay, but having said that, there is actually one respect in which I do have a bit of an opinion in a way. So, okay, I don't regret the collapse of communism. Yes, because people don't want to live under the kind of socialist communist regimes that they were living under in the Soviet Union. Elsewhere, then they don't, if they want to do it, that's fine. If they don't want to do it, then it's not going to happen, is it? No, you can have a long discussion about what came after the Soviet collapse, in terms of the kind of like robber baron capitalist system that prevailed in Russia in the 1990s, and one could have wished there'd have been a much smoother and less dramatic transition away from the Soviet system to a form of capitalism. So I don't particularly regret the communist collapse, but I do regret the breakup of the Soviet Union as a multinational state. I think that was I'm inclined to agree with Putin about that. That was a kind of great tragedy.
Well, that is a controversial thing to say.
No. There's lots of people who wouldn't be on it. Collapsing communism is one thing. Collapsing the multinational state is another thing. Okay, well, we know it broke up. Because of nationalism, don't we? Because of local nationalisms within the system, which pressed for separation. And the principal architect of the breakup of the Soviet Union, quite ironically, was Russia and Russian nationalism and Yeltsin. That's what deconstructed the system primarily.
But the Soviet Union, which would be opposed to colonialism, was engaged in the aggression of many states.
Yeah, a lot. But the reason I kind of course, the other thing, remember, the Russian Federation is the successor to the Soviet Union as a multinational state. Okay, it's much more heavily, predominantly Russian in ethnic terms, 80%, but there's still 20% of the population who are non-Russian. So it is a multi-ethnic state. And by the way, it's conducting its war in Ukraine as a multi-ethnic state. It's not conducting an ethnic war with Ukraine. It's the multi-Russian national state is at war in Ukraine. In pursuit of its security goals and other goals as well. So I regret the breakup of the Soviet Union because in my heart of hearts I'm an internationalist, and I think the more states are diverse, multinational, multi-ethnic, the better I like it. So for me, it would have been a far better solution if the Soviet Union, maybe not all of it, but a good part of it, had kind of remained together. Including, of course, the Ukrainian part. I think it would have been much better. So for Ukraine and Russia, and also other, had the Union held itself together.
So you're not a supporter of Scottish independence. You're not a supporter of Scottish independence.
Well, in general, in general, I'm supportive of an internationalism and multinational. And also, and what should we really be discussing that kind of political kind of issue? But the short answer is no. Although I live in Ireland, so it's not my business in a way. But no, because Britain, of course, is another example of a multinational state, and I don't have any problems, with that. When people ask me, what's your nationality? My answer would always be, I'm British. I live in Ireland, but my nationality is British, and of course, British is it's not an ethnic or national identity. It's a kind of political, historical identity. Yes, I think it's a great thing that so far, up until now, the Scots, the Welsh, the English, and still part of the Irish in North are coexisting within a single state. And it's a very good thing that the Russian Federation is a multinational state. And I think it would have been better from many points of view had the Soviet Union as a multinational state, a non-communist Soviet Union multinational state had that survived rather than breaking up as in the way that it did.
So ultimately, What do you believe to be the single most powerful determinant in what was the systemic oppression, repression, violence, and terror in the Soviet?
You mean under Stalin?
Yeah.
Of the violence and terror? The ideology and the politics. Yeah, it's a ideologically, politically driven terror and repression. Yeah.
So that is that part of Marxism or part of Soviet Marxism?
It's the way, the way Marxism was extended and developed by Stalin in his era. Yeah. And it's the way it actualized itself in a particular set of circumstances. Yeah. So it's Stalinism as a system of terror, or the Great Terror. It's a politically and ideologically driven process. Yeah, that's that would be my view. But of course, it takes place in a particular kind of context. So, for example, one of the contexts was the very threatening international context in the 1930s. Yeah, when which was the 1930s being the height of the Great Terror, the mass repression, or the mass political repression anyway. It's a very dangerous and threatening international situation. Yeah, that's an important context. Well, but the kind of context is real. It's not just a Soviet imaginary. It's not just Stalin imagining. There are threats to the system, or there are capitalist countries which are hostile. There are subversive elements from outside the country trying to link up with opposition inside the country. It's not. There's a certain amount of conspiracy thinking on Stalin's part, but there's also a kind of reality out there, and it's responding to that reality. But the problem, of course, is that the Stalin's response to that reality is excessive. Yeah, and it's not just there are like real spies, saboteurs, assassins out there and active in the Soviet context in the 1930s. But most of the people who are arrested in prison, executed, shot, don't come into that category. They are not. They're mostly innocent. But of course, that's where the ideology comes into it, because it drives a particular perspective on what on the extent and nature of the internal threat to the Soviet system, and it's Stalin's leadership of that, his kind of firm belief that the system is under threat from a combination of internal and external enemies. He's the one who actually drives that whole process forward. So he has like prime responsibility for what happens, for this brutal wave after wave of repressions that we call the Great Terror. But on the other hand, it was Stalin. Stalin brought it to an end. Stalin, called a halt to the whole thing. He stopped the terror, or at least he kind of like didn't stop it completely, of course, because the system went on being very repressive and brutal, and during the war itself, there was another kind of wave of mass repression that took place. But Stalin started and drove the terror, but he was also the one who actually stopped. So again, it goes back to what I talked about, the complexity, the contradiction. The reality, the truth is, it's not as simple as you might think. Yes, it was Stalin's terror. Yeah, he did start it. He did motivate it, drive it forward. But at some point, he came to see it as being. He came to see it gone too far, and it had become dysfunctional, and it had served its purpose. And now was the time to actually to call a halt to it and to tack off into another direction.
But was that a moral calculus, or was it in the interest of preventing Soviet Marxism just eating its own?
No, it's a political calculus. It's not a moral calculus. The morality for Stalin is always about the revolution, the goals of the revolution. The socialist and communist utopia.
Okay, so
there's no. Well, I mean, there is a morality in the sense that the overriding morality is doing whatever it takes to protect the revolution, protect socialism, carry forward the historical process to achieve the communist utopia. That's the overriding moral moral goal.
So when you pull back the curtain on Stalin, there is an ideologist behind it.
absolutely.
And so the power politics is subservient to the ideology.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And it's also it's not just a kind of a political or calculative thing. My argument is that it's Stalin's politics and ideology that shape his personality. I describe him as a political personality, someone whose like character is shaped from the outside inwards. Yeah, so he becomes, as a personality, he becomes what he is in terms of his presentation of his public self. You see what I'm saying?
I do. And so people's identity is shaped partly by themselves and partly what the outside world perceives them as.
Yeah. So, and that's what, when you actually get inside his head, get inside his identity, that's what you find. Yeah. That's what I found. In terms of my research. We'll see.
I think you've got a whole chapter there that's called Stalin the Plagiarizer.
What? There's just one section. Yeah.
I mean, but I know what you're talking about. What you're saying is that he was not an inventor of ideas. He was a propagator, a sorter, an editor of other people's ideas.
Yeah. But to be fair, son, he did make he had some interesting things to say actually about nationalism. We were talking about nationalism earlier. He had some interesting things to say about nationalism. So there's a Marxist view of nations and nationalism. But apart from that, he wasn't. No, I don't think he was a very original thinker. But he was quite adept at projecting his ideology and politics. He was a great simplifier and codifier, and but it actually worked. It was actually he was quite an effective political intellectual. I think that's the key thing. The key point to make here is he was very effective
as a strainer.
He was very effective administrator, but in terms of the way he handled ideas, projected ideas, and pulled things together, and gave people a sense of gave meaning, but also a sense of direction to what they were doing. Yeah. So he wasn't an original thinker and a great intellectual, but he had his own like intellectual qualities. Yeah. And again, we need to recognise what these were.
Well, I mean, to the final question, this discussion's largely been about intellectuals and power and Stalin being an intellectual, a non-academic intellectual. There's a lot of intellectuals in this world. Are any of them capable of filling Stalin's shoes?
Well, hang on, we wouldn't want to fill Stalin's shoes, would we?
Well, no.
Well, maybe in some contexts you might, but in general we wouldn't, because, he...
It's a joke question.
Oh, I see, right. Yeah, right, okay. Yeah. Well, I suppose, the answer is no. Because, okay, I need to be careful what I say it.
Well, I guess another way
the one exception that springs to my mind, but I don't want to be misunderstood. When I say this, is that the only person springs to my mind that could fill Stalin's shoes would be Putin, and I don't mean that in the sense of Putin could be a great dictator or is a great dictator like Stalin was. I don't think Putin is an intellectual in the same way that Stalin was. I think Putin's more of a politician and a man of action than Stalin, But at the same time, Putin is extremely interested in ideas. He's extremely interested in history. He's extremely interested in literature, He's not an intellectual, but there is a depth to his intellectuality, which I don't, maybe you can correct me. I don't see that kind of depth of intellectuality present in any other political leader in today's world that I think of. If you want to correct me and make some suggestions.
No, but
so I think Putin is quite is quite exceptional leader in that respect. Yeah.
No, but going back to the role of identity in Stalin and the wider national and international environment shaping his persona, are the conditions similar for Putin today for the wider environment to shape him into a figure similar to Stalin?
I mean, similar to Stalin in what sense? As kind of like a brutal dictator and stuff like that. Is that what you mean?
No, not necessarily. No, but broadly through your eyes.
Depends what you mean. I don't see Putin ever sharing Stalin's politics and ideology and everything that goes with it. Yeah, no, I don't think that's a possibility there. Again, I think it's too early to tell. It's to answer that. It's why I prefer history, because you look back in history, stuff has happened, and you can work out why it happened, and and obviously, the more evidence you have, the more certain you can be about your conclusion about why. But when you're kind of like looking forward, of course, the future hasn't happened yet; it's unknown. It's a lot kind of speculation out there. But going back to the discussion we've had throughout this conversation about the Ukraine war, and about how the outlook is very pessimistic. Yes, and even though I try to be optimism of the world, that kind of argument. We need to try and do what we can to shape the future rather than just passively sit back and let it roll over us and wherever it's going to take us. Yeah. So that's but Putin is the one thing that gives me hope in the current situation. I think I have some hope that he, as a leader, could actually see his way and find his way to some kind of settlement that could end the war and could stabilize the situation, and avert the nightmare prospect of a forever war between Russia and the West over Ukraine. I think he has the potential to be, in that respect, in that context, to be a real kind of like real statesman. To be prepared to take some risks for peace.
And would that entail him taking a hit on his face in Russia as far as showing concessions to the West?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For example, in terms of my idea of Russia agreeing to Ukraine becoming a member of NATO.
And do you think he's capable of
yes,
moderating political backlash inside Russia?
I think he's capable of doing that. I think he has the power and popularity. Yeah, it wouldn't make him Mr. Popular among a lot of Russians. No, I think he has the power and popularity to do that. I think there's the potential there. Yeah. So in a way, I mean, I hope my words up. Yeah, I see Putin as being the best hope for peace in the short term. So we're very fortunate that we have that Putin is in power. Putin's leader. Because he's a moderate. As I said, he has a depth of insight and intellectuality, I think, which might lead him to be able to embrace some imaginative solutions which could bring this immense tragic situation to an end. But of course, he can't on his own. He needs winning partners. He needs winning partners among Ukrainians, and he needs winning partners in the West. Yeah? So and if that's not available, whatever Putin's abilities or inclinations or potential might be, is the war will go on, and the situation will get progressively worse.
So you believe if the West was able to succeed in removing Putin, that we could do a lot worse?
Oh, we would do a lot worse, for sure. Absolutely, no doubt whatsoever. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
I mean that's why that's an interesting question. Is a Russian friend of mine, and he was explaining. He's not pro-Putin, but he was explaining why he actually voted for Putin in the presidential election, and he said well, he was listening to all these Western commentators who were saying basically that without Putin, Russia would be a lot weaker as a country and a lot easier to handle, yeah? So they were saying it from the point of view of regime change. Yeah, we need, if we're going to contain Russia, be able to handle Russia, control Russia, we need to get rid of Putin. Because when Putin's gone, the whole system will collapse or it'll be in chaos or this kind of thing, yeah? So his response said, yeah, actually they're right, If we want to keep Russia strong, then we need to keep Putin. And that's why I'm going to vote for him, even though I don't necessarily agree with his politics or everything he does, and I would be a critic of the war, in fact.
But a weak Russia is a more dangerous Russia.
Yes, absolutely, more dangerous. See, dangerous for the Russian people, of course, but dangerous for the rest of us as well. Yeah. So we need everyone needs a strong and stable Russia, and at the moment that means that we need Putin. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll end it on that. That was a really great conversation, Geoffrey Roberts. Thank you. It's an honor. And all respect to you and conversation. Thank you for being respectful to me too.
Yeah, thanks.